Let's get it on then, shall we? Mwah. Welcome to Sex on the Peach, your weekly hump day dose of everyone's favourite untalked about topic, sex. Let's get honest, let's get open, let's get comfortable, and let's get into this week's show. Good morning, Upper East Siders, friends, lovers, listeners. It's Lawsuit Girl here, and this is Witness Testimony Wednesday. Spotted B and J in a legal drama. Okay, I'm not going to be doing the whole episode like that, don't worry. But hi, it's me, I'm back. It's been a month. Like, it's literally been a month. It's now March. And it's also been a month, if you get me. And I did want to record this a little bit ago. I've been down very bad with whatever the fuck viral bug is going around. Had zero voice. I can't lie, it was pretty unpleasant to listen to. I'm dealing with a house move. It's been what it is. I've been non-existent, but I am back. Hi. And I've been saying for weeks that I am going to do an episode on today's topic, and you are probably now all fucking over it. And if that's the case, fair, scroll on. Anyway, it's no surprise to anyone who follows me on social media that I have been following the Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni lawsuits like I'm working on their legal teams. Like I sacked in my PhD and did a law degree in 2 weeks, and I'm now a High Court American judge. That's me and about 1 million content creators on TikTok, to be fair. We are giving on the jury. And I'm not ashamed to say I have been listening to their content. It's actually the most I've ever used TikTok by a country mile. And there are some legit lawyers just simply breaking down the legal shit, which I find really helpful. And then there's a lot of opinions and conspiracy theories, all the usual stuff that you would expect. And I've tried to listen to a lot on both sides because I think that's important. Whether I like what I'm hearing or not, you know, the more information we have to draw on, the better. Now, I want to say this is not a pop culture podcast, nor do I want it to become one. There are sometimes stories that I feel play into things that I already talk about. Like I did an episode on the Jonah Hill story in season 2 because it played into the topic of boundaries and control issues in relationships. And sometimes it is really helpful to see these situations highlighted in the media and also see what the public response to them is, because I'm very much someone who sees celebrities as just other people. But there are people who glorify them. And for people who do glorify celebrities, maybe it's helpful to see that they have the same relationship issues and toxic traits, the same shit as the rest of us. Because they are just people. So sometimes we can use these stories that are massively played out in the media as a point of reference for things that go on in our own lives. Not that the majority of us can afford multi-million-dollar lawsuits, but you know what I mean. Sometimes you see something played out publicly and it reflects something you've experienced personally. And sometimes it makes you see it in a slightly new light, that kind of thing. And I've talked a lot already on this season, to the point that I think it's probably sometimes boring for everyone, about misogyny and about different kinds of sexual violence towards women. And I actually think this case has a place in those conversations in one way or another. Now, I have my personal thoughts on the case, of course, which I'm not afraid to share, and I will, but I will try to deliver the more factual information as neutrally as I can. Because the amount of posts I see that are like, your bias is showing. And well, yes, when there is a divisive case and people choose a team, they are likely to then be biased toward them. So you may feel completely differently about this case than I do, and that is completely fine. I mean, the amount of flip-flopping I've seen from people since the first complaint dropped in December is kind of wild. Because I also think, regardless of my thoughts, The majority part of me just feels like we need to wait and see what evidence is presented in court next March. But we are waiting a whole year, so people are going to continue to talk. And the court of public opinion is going to continue doing its thing, and we will all inevitably have opinions if we care. I'm not ashamed to say that Gossip Girl and Jane the Virgin are two of my favourite TV shows, so this whole thing is truly a conflicting nightmare. I'm only kind of joking, truly first world problems. Anyway, let's get into it. We all know I had a terrible time coming up with a title for today's podcast, and I don't know what you are all using ChatGPT for and thinking it's life-changing, because I asked it for help with this, and its best attempt was Legally Blonde, but it's Blake Lively and way less fun. Like, are you well? It didn't even try a wordplay on like Legally Blake. Gave me nothing. Anyway, to be honest, the one I've gone with still doesn't sound great read out. It looks a bit better written down. And I have to give credit to my best friend, Devika Joshi. You all know and love her by now. For the help on this one. Well, I say credit. If you like it, then it's credit. And if you hate it, then it's blame. And if it's blame, then I'm dropping her as quickly as Taylor Swift dropped bestie Blake Lively over this lawsuit. Anyway, it's basically a play on as if I'm explaining it, as if I'm actually explaining it. Don't they say if you have to explain a joke, it's not very good? But yes, it's a play on the term bold-faced lie. But instead, we have boldony-faced lively. Right? Oh, whatever. Let's just get the fuck on with this. Okay, so I'm going to do an exceptionally quick breakdown of events for anyone who doesn't have a fucking clue what I'm talking about. And if you are one of those people, I mean, I'm grateful you're even choosing to listen, so that you have a brief idea of where we are at, and then we'll get into things in more detail. Although I will say the point of this podcast is more to highlight things within this case that might represent things that might show up in our own lives and relationships. So don't get me wrong, I won't be reading 200 plus page lawsuits. We'll just be discussing some key points. But here we go with the bare bones of the situation. So in January 2023, Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni were announced as the leads Lily and Ryle in the film adaptation of the Colleen Hoover novel It Ends With Us, which is supposedly about domestic violence and survivors. I have read and watched it, by the way, even though Blake Lively apparently didn't. So I don't say supposedly because I don't know what it's about, just because, actually we'll get onto that in a bit. May 2023 to early 2024, they filmed the thing. Then we got to August 2024, and during the press for the movie, things got weird. On Blake's side, fans were starting to call out the way she was promoting the movie, because she wouldn't talk about domestic violence in interviews. She treated it as a girly rom-com. Her tagline became, "Grab your friends, wear your florals." And she also seemingly used the movie to promote two of her own new businesses, one of which was a hair care line, and the other was an alcohol line, which was further called out as being misaligned with the message of the movie, considering alcohol is such a huge contributor to domestic violence. And on Justin's side of things, he was seemingly completely separate from the rest of the cast. On red carpets, in interviews, at the film's premieres, and also Blake Lively, Colleen Hoover, and the rest of the cast had all unfollowed him on social media. So this started fueling some very public rumours of a rift between everyone. But I think it's safe to say at the time, Justin was still coming out on top in the court of public opinion, because his promotion of the film was very focused on domestic violence and honouring survivors. Whereas on the other side, people were essentially coming for Blake on social media. Fast forward to December 2024. Blake Lively filed a legal complaint in the New York Times accusing Justin Baldoni of sexual harassment and orchestrating a smear campaign to tarnish her reputation in the wake of all of the hate she was getting on social media. Now, everyone immediately did a swift 180 to Blake Lively's side on social media, and the hate became reserved for Justin Baldoni because it seemingly all now made complete sense. That's, of course, why everyone unfollowed him on social media, right? We added 2 and 2 and we got what we thought was 4. Then Justin Baldoni filed a $250 million lawsuit against the New York Times and a $400 million lawsuit against Blake Lively, her husband Ryan Reynolds, and their publicists, alleging a coordinated effort to damage his career. So now what? Now people have to pick a team, apparently. And the hate and the support all became very divided. In February, Blake Lively amended her lawsuit against Justin Baldoni, Wayfarer Studios, and other parties. She is currently seeking an enhanced protective order to classify certain evidence as attorney's eyes only, to protect not just some of the people involved, but also sensitive nature of some of the materials, apparently. Justin Baldoni's legal team opposes this. They claim it's an attempt to withhold evidence to protect her reputation. And, who knows what this could be. It could be damning evidence for Justin. It could be texts between her and Taylor Swift saying Justin is a hottie. We don't know. The trial is currently scheduled to commence in March 2026. So, of course, there is going to be ongoing public and media scrutiny, even though the Judge Lyman, has instructed both of their legal teams to stop playing this case out for the public and potentially creating a biased jury. And I mean, sorry about it, Judge Lyman, but I think it might be a bit too late for that. And in terms of legal representation, Blake Lively is represented by Michael Gottlieb and Justin Baldoni by Bryant Friedman. And I want to take a moment for the language of it all. Because apparently top Hollywood litigators now say receipts. In interviews, they literally say things like, "We will be bringing the receipts." Sorry, sir, do you mean evidence? What in the Gen Z is going on here? Like, is this a high-profile lawsuit or a reality TV show? Because what in the Love is Blind is going on? Okay, so even though that might sound like a lot, this is basic AF. But what I will say is I think that this whole situation is a real tale of nuance, which I think is something that is generally lacking in society and in general discourse. We aren't really taught it. We aren't taught to seek out nuance or context or to exercise critical thinking skills. And I see a lot of black or white, all or nothing thinking, and that just isn't the way the world works. And this case truly highlights how people can see the same version of events completely differently. And I'm not necessarily just referring to Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni themselves when I say that. I'm talking about how two people can read the same piece of evidence and completely disagree on how it makes them feel or what it makes them think. Like, two people will read these lawsuits and one person will say Justin Baldoni's evidence is irrefutable, and another person will say, what evidence? He literally hasn't provided any. So essentially, I don't think this is a black and white case. I think a lot of it is going to boil down to emotions, and that is a really difficult place to work from because there's a lot of in between that people may not ever understand because A, we weren't there, B, we don't know these people, and C, again, multiple people will see this exact same situation as being completely different. So I would request that even this episode is approached with nuance and an open mind and accepting that multiple people's feelings can be true and valid at the same time, because that is just as true in life as it is in this court case, and we could all do with exercising that path of thinking more frequently. And before we get onto the lawsuit more, I actually just want to mention the actual film and novel, It Ends With Us. Has anyone read it and or seen it? Because it was not for me. And I'm kind of beside myself that people are falling for it. People are falling for this honestly kind of romanticized version of domestic violence. I've seen so many people say it's such an amazing depiction. And I'm like, did we read the same book or watch the same film? And this is exactly what I was just saying about nuance and differing opinions on the same thing. It's not a bad book or a bad movie, but it's not a good barometer for a depiction of domestic violence. Yes, I completely buy into the seemingly perfect guy who is not perfect and is in fact abusive as fuck. Completely. I've been in 2 heavily abusive relationships myself, and it is unbelievably traumatizing. And the character of Ryle definitely heavily reminded me of one of those exes in particular. But I mean, to any of my listeners who have been in violent relationships, please tell me if leaving was, spoiler alert, that easy. Because I do not know anyone for whom that has been the experience. In fact, for me, trying to leave was the scariest time, and when things got really dangerous. And that's often even what we hear from the legal side of things. Things escalate when people try to leave. And I'm legitimately very interested to hear from anyone who has had an experience like that. Because in general terms, as much as we are going to throw a generalization out on this podcast, I completely appreciate that every single person's experience is so different. But generally, trying to leave is one of the most terrifying times. But in a moment when he is trying to pin her down, she manages to escape, get in her car, and then seemingly just get on with her life. Then in the book, he drives her to the hospital to give birth. She lets him hold their baby while she essentially tells him they are never getting back together. She challenges him on the fact he's an abuser, and would he ever stand by and let a man treat their new daughter like that whilst he's holding their baby? It's like, in what world does this happen? I would, of course, love to believe that people who commit domestic violence can learn and change. But this is just like an insane depiction of what it might look like to leave a violent relationship in real life. And I have actual concern and worry for young people reading it. And I would actually, in fact, like to issue caution that if you do ever find yourself in a terrible, terrible situation, like a violent relationship, that you don't assume it might play out in any way like it does in this book. That actually feels really quite important to me, and something that I feel is very worth mentioning on this podcast. Obviously, I talk about abusive relationships and sexual violence quite sadly very often, but we can't be using romanticized novels and movies as a guidebook for what it might actually look like to live out an exit from a violent relationship. The best thing I think the movie did in terms of violence is when it first occurred, it was portrayed to the watcher as each incident could have been perceived and explained away as an accident. But then later on in the movie, when she's realized what's going on, we see all of those moments get replayed. And as the watcher, we get to see them completely differently. And we can see them as the violently intentioned acts that they were. And I think that is relatable for a lot of people who have been in relationships with people who are violent. When love and emotion get in the way, we are so capable of brushing things under the carpet, excusing things, convincing ourselves those violent or abusive actions were anything other than what they actually were. And it all gets very cloudy. And I appreciated that we saw that transition through her character's eyes. But other than that, I don't know. I mean, So let's talk more about the lawsuit. As I said, I'm not going to be breaking it down page by page because this podcast would be days long, and every single day something else seems to come out. So it would be impossible for me to cover everything. I'm going to try my best to say what I think is important. But basically, this is where we are at thus far. So let's talk about Blake Lively's original legal complaint. So this was filed with the California Civil Rights Department, and it was also publicized in a New York Times article called "We Can Bury Anyone Inside a Hollywood Smear Machine." And it revealed a series of serious allegations against Justin Baldoni and Wayfarer Studios, as I already mentioned, of sexual harassment, a hostile work environment, and of him running a smear campaign against her. Now, she claimed that Justin Baldoni improvised intimate scenes during the filming of It Ends With Us, which, whilst he acted as the main character, he also directed the film. She claimed that he improvised things that were not in the script, things that she had not agreed to. It also accused him of making inappropriate remarks about his personal life, which she felt were unwelcome and unprofessional. And her legal team argued that these remarks contributed to an uncomfortable atmosphere on set, where her personal boundaries were repeatedly ignored. Another major part of the complaint, which obviously was a huge thing for most people reading it, I think, it involved claims that her privacy was violated by not just Justin Baldoni, but also producer Jamie Heath, alleging that both of them would enter her trailer uninvited on multiple occasions, even during times when she was undressed or breastfeeding her child. And also that Jamie Heath forced her to watch an inappropriate video of his wife's home birth. Her team claimed that this was all a clear violation of her personal space and an example of a lack of respect for her privacy. And this complaint wasn't just about those incidents. It also suggested that after she voiced her concerns, she then became the target of what her legal team have described as this smear campaign, which was supposedly designed to undermine her credibility with the goal of making her accusations, if they came to light, appear exaggerated or fabricated. And the New York Times shared a bunch of text messages, receipts, that were exchanged between Justin Baldoni and members of his public relations team. And these texts have become a key part of the story. But at the point of this article, we were seeing communication with Justin Baldoni, Jennifer Abel, a member of his team, and Melissa Nathan, a public relations consultant, about the situation at the time of release of the film. And these texts seem to show that Justin Baldoni and his team were focused on managing any media fallout from the fact that him and Blake were so separate during the press for the film, and discussing how to protect his public image and minimize the damage to the film's reputation. And when this complaint dropped in the New York Times, I think it's fair to say shit hit the fan. The social media flip was fucking savage. Justin Baldoni became villain number one on social media. He was immediately dropped from his agency, William Morris Entertainment, literally dropped like a hot piece of coal. He immediately had an award rescinded from the company Vital Voices, who are a non-profit company that invest in women. And Justin had previously won the Voices of Solidarity Award, which was to recognize his work advocating for women. And the co-host of his podcast, which is called Man Enough, which is about being a man in today's world and how to reflect and grow and support women, but also your fellow man. His female co-host, Liz Plank, immediately quit. And because he has been such a loud voice for women and women's rights, obviously the response was that he's worse than someone who just outwardly hates women, of which there are sadly so many in this day and age. You know, no one would be surprised if Andrew Tate came out with this shit. And people were up in his grill. And I mean, not just his, but his wife's, his colleagues from Jane the Virgin. And I know we live in cancel culture, which I don't agree with, but it got insane. And then when he released his subsequent lawsuits, which we'll get to in a minute, people flip-flopped again. And I would just love if people on social media would just take a fucking breath. Because, I mean, listen, I've spent more time than I would like to admit watching videos on social media about this lawsuit. I love to know the legal ins and outs of things, and I have watched people's opinions on this. So I'm not exempt from this, even myself, because I am participating in social media running this case in one way or another. But seeing some of the comments, like full character assassinations of these people that we do not even know. And when and why did we become like this? Because I don't believe for one single second that anyone who is sending a comment like that would have the gall to go up to Justin Baldoni or Blake Lively or Ryan Reynolds or Taylor Swift, the cast of Jane the Virgin, the cast of Gossip Girl, and say any of this shit in person. And I just think the way people think that they can sit behind a screen and just tear people to shreds, it is a trait that is becoming so common and so dangerous. I mean, it needs to be studied. Maybe I'll study it. And Blake Lively has turned her comments off and people are up in arms about it. And I get it. It's a lot. And I digress. But we keep seeing these shifts. And whatever way people go, even if they yesterday were Blake Lively, today they're Justin Baldoni, they just cannot berate these people more. And aside from social media, the way that very real people in these people's lives are just like, bye. Like this case, these lawsuits are really just highlighting the worst in humanity in a social aspect. Like the people on social media are acting crazy, but also the real people who exist in Justin Baldoni, Blake Lively's lives. It's all kind of wild to me because they're like, see ya. You know, Taylor Swift is meant to be Blake Lively's best friend. And from what we know, she has bounced. Like as soon as she got brought into the public eye with this lawsuit, she was out. She was like, girl, I'm done. Thanks for the friendship, but no thanks. And with respect, if tomorrow Dev, God love her, got accused of something awful, I can't imagine a world in which I would just be like, bye. You know, if someone in my close circle had done some awful thing they had been accused of, I would want to be with them and talk to them about it like someone who has been in their life for a really long time and try and understand it and get to the bottom of it. Like, what is going on in this shit show of a world? Because nowadays, everyone truly is just like, see ya, not interested, but I will sit behind a screen and just absolutely tear everyone to fucking shreds. It's really just highlighting horrible, horrible traits in all of us. Anyway, I keep going off on these little tangents. This all had a huge immediate impact, as we can see, on Justin Baldoni's professional life. I don't know about his personal life because I don't know the man. Like, we need to keep remembering we don't know these people. Anyway, back to the legal shit, because he was not going to sit and play pretty. And it's giving theatre. It's giving there's going to be a musical about it in this day and age, because the first line of this lawsuit is pure drama. It's pure theatre. The following is not a story the Wayfarer parties ever wished to tell. I'm sorry, is this the new Wicked? These things are sent to try us. Do you know what I mean? Like, what's happening? Anyway, I guess I'm kind of here for it. Keeps it engaging. But anyway, his legal team have quickly moved to counteract all of these accusations with not just one lawsuit, but a series of aggressive lawsuits. So, as previously mentioned, he has filed a staggering $400 million lawsuit against Blake Lively, Ryan Reynolds, and their publicist, Leslie Sloan. And this one is accusing them of extortion, defamation, invasion of privacy, a whole bunch of stuff. And I'm pretty sure they are worth like $390 million or something as a couple. And it's giving petty. He's like, oh, and I'll just take the 10 million extra just for fun, just for interest. So Justin Baldoni's side of the story is that Blake Lively sought to manipulate the production of It Ends With Us and gain creative control over the film and over the entire process, and is now trying to excuse that by leveraging these accusations against him and Wayfarer Studios. And the whole lawsuit is pretty bold, but essentially what has been put out there is that Blake Lively's claims are not genuine. They are not motivated by genuine desire for justice or for women, but they are instead a way to secure her power in the movie making process of It Ends With Us. And so she has used false accusations of misconduct to excuse her attempt to control the direction of the film. So this will suggest that these claims of harassment were not genuine. They are literally just pushing her agenda in Hollywood. And they've also accused Ryan Reynolds and their publicist, Leslie Sloan, of being part of this alleged scheme. And it's claimed that the couple and this PR team have worked to coordinate a negative media campaign against Justin Baldoni. So at this point, there's just so many fucking smear campaigns going on. It's pretty dirty. You know what I mean? If you are in the car, you cannot see out of this windscreen. So both people are saying there's defamation going on. It's a whole mess. And on top of just the drama with Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds, Justin Baldoni has, yes, launched the other legal battle against the New York Times. And this is the $250 million libel lawsuit accusing the New York Times, of biased and misleading reporting. And his legal team have argued that the media outlet published an article unfairly slanted in Blake Lively's favor. They've portrayed him as the villain and they haven't fully investigated the claims. They've also said that the paper relied on selectively edited communications and they've misrepresented Justin Baldoni and his actions and his side of the story. So the crux of this complaint is that the New York Times have not reported fact. They've misrepresented key facts and they've crafted a biased narrative that is aligned only with Blake Lively's false accusations. They've ignored crucial context. And this, according to his legal team, not only harmed his reputation, but also made it difficult for him to continue working in the industry and damaged his public image, which in Hollywood can sometimes be almost impossible to repair. And to be honest, we have seen some of that already play out. You know, in the drop from his agent, in the drop of the award, the drop from his podcast co-host. You know, some of the damage has been done. Blake Lively has also amended her lawsuit back to Justin, suggesting that there are other women who have issues with him. Who they are, we've yet to find out. But I think it's fair to say the legal battle is raging on, and Judge Lyman, who is intended to lead the case, has requested that it stop playing out. As we said, we don't want there to be bias on the jury when it finally comes to trial. But as of late, one of the more controversial moves has been Blake Lively's request for Justin Baldoni's phone records, and she has sought to subpoena his communications to basically uncover anything that could support her accusations. Because this subpoena was for any communications for the last 2.5 years. And from what I understand from having watched a lot of legal stuff on this, it's actually kind of normal for phone records to be subpoenaed in a lawsuit like this. However, because it was 2.5 years and also communications to basically anyone, this takes it back to like before they even started filming, right? So the judge has ruled that this request is too broad and invasive. So I believe there is still a subpoena going ahead, but not to that extent. And it will be interesting to see how much information we as the public continue to get, because obviously the judge has asked for this all to stop playing out in the media, but we know what the fucking media is like. They will continue to amplify things. The TikTokers, the content creators will continue to do their thing. And I'm sure there will be a wealth of information available, but how accurate it is, who fucking knows? And this case has really been a highlight for keep everything. Don't delete a fucking thing. Because when we talk about accuracy, if you have read the original New York Times article, yes, there is a bunch of text messages, receipts in it. And then you see Justin Baldoni's lawsuit and you see the way these text messages have been cherry-picked. And that to me was an immediate huge red flag, because it is not to say that things didn't go down on this set and during this process. But if you are not giving people the whole information, the whole truth and nothing but the truth in the first place, if you are going to offer information that is a kind of full of holes, and then those gaps have to be filled from another source, and you can see that loads of things have been missed out, that already looks fucking shady. Even if it isn't, it looks problematic. So you are already doing yourself a disservice, because you are making yourself look like a liar. You're making yourself look like someone who will doctor a conversation to serve your narrative, rather than present people with the entirety of a conversation and allow them to make their own minds up. So I personally think this was a huge fail on behalf of the New York Times, because they may not have expected Justin Baldoni to fight back the way he has. But if you know that the entire conversations are out there, that they exist, and you know that the extra information can be provided, this was a huge, silly risk to take. You know, if someone goes, this is all the information we have, and then another person goes, wait, that's not true. Like, this is all the information you have. And it's like way more information. Whatever the truth actually is outside of phone screens, outside of receipts, that just already doesn't look very good. So what I would say is the main thing that Justin Baldoni did in his lawsuit was provide context for all of the things that weren't provided in the original article. Because for every text that was offered to us to read, there were probably about 5 to 10 other messages in between each one that offered a completely different tone, context, suggestion, premise. And that is concerning, because if you are going to make a whole accusation with your whole chest, why the cherry picking in the first place? Why would you need to do that? And one of Blake Lively's accusations, obviously as mentioned, was that Justin Baldoni and producer Jamie Heath were entering her trailer when she was breastfeeding, and this was a huge, huge issue. And then one of the text messages that was provided by Justin Baldoni was a message from Blake Lively saying, I'm just in my trailer pumping if you want to come read lines. And listen, Blake Lively could have felt comfortable with men being in her trailer when she was breastfeeding and changed her mind at any time. And that has to be fine. That is okay. You know, you can have someone enter your trailer whilst you are breastfeeding and feel comfortable about that 25, 30, 100 times and then change your mind. And you, as a woman, as a mother, have absolute autonomy to make that decision and say, I don't want that to happen anymore. That is absolute fact. But what would have probably been more helpful was to say, at one point I suggested that they were able to come into my trailer whilst I was pumping, and then I changed my mind and they still continue to do so, because that's something completely different. I mean, obviously I'm not a fucking lawyer, and also maybe I shouldn't be suggesting what you should have done because I'm not in this position. But I just think that when we are offered a blanket statement of they came into my trailer uninvited, and then there is a piece of evidence to show that there was at one point an invitation there, then what is the context? Then what's gone wrong? And it was similar with the fact that heavily mentioned in Blake Lively's complaint was that they filmed a video scene where there was no sound recorded, because in the film that scene is to music, so there's no script in the film, and that Justin Baldoni was saying things to her, doing things that made her feel uncomfortable. And one specific quote was that he smelled her neck and said, you smell so good. And it was highlighted as being in an extremely creepy way. Now, this video was then released to the public with the recorded sound from the room because, yet again, there wasn't script. It was filmed as a dance montage, and in the movie, there's music to it. But obviously, just in the room, there was sound, and we could then hear their conversation. And what we actually hear is Blake Lively say, I probably smell of fake tan or tan. I can't remember the exact words, but not me giving it. We need to get the factual evidence, and then I'm kind of paraphrasing. But she suggested that her fake tan smelled, and Justin Baldoni's response was, don't worry, it smells good. Which again looks completely different to what was originally said. And that's not to say that even if she said, I probably smell a fake tan, he might have said, don't worry, you smell good. And that could still make a woman feel uncomfortable. I'm not disputing that because, again, this is about nuance. People see things differently. If a man said that to me, I don't think it would bother me. But if a man said that to another woman who is different from it might bother them. And that's okay if it does. But when you have presented information to us in a way that is inaccurate, and then there is a piece of evidence that shows otherwise, that is when things start to look incredibly sketchy. And what we also saw in that video was a lot of normal conversation between the two of them because there wasn't script being recorded. And a lot of discourse I've seen on social media about that has been, well, he wasn't in character. You know, they weren't in character. They were talking about their marriages. They were talking about their lives. So when she said he would come out of character and do things that were inappropriate, that's a fair thing to say. I'm just going to say this. Maybe everyone I've ever worked with is really unprofessional. Maybe every single actor in the world is actually really just not that professional, because when I have been in ensembles of shows, you know, when I was in Wicked, shall we say, because why not? We've already talked about it in this podcast and people probably know that more than anything else because obviously the movie. You know, when we would do the scene in the show where we're going after the witch and we would be talking to each other, I don't think a single person ever said to me anything about the witch. I don't think any of us were giving witch hunters in that moment. We were sure keeping the energy alive, keeping our body language alive, but sometimes vocally people stepped out of character to shout, to say something else. At the back of the stage in Thank Goodness, where we're all supposed to be talking, I don't think any of us were talking about Glinda's engagement. I think we were like, you know, again, keeping our faces, bodies, energies alive, and probably like, so what are you up to this weekend? That's what I know of acting. And by all means, I'm sure there are people out there who are unbelievably professional and never once step out of character in a million years. But it's not been in my experience since 2008. I mean, I only know musical theatre. I don't know film. So maybe I am not fair in saying that. But that's all that looked like to me. I'm like, yeah, sure, I've experienced that. Where my voice isn't being heard, my mic is not turned on. We keep the energy alive, but sometimes our conversation diverts to something that isn't about the show. So I don't think the fact that they were also both conversing, it's not like she was talking as Lily and he was responding as Justin Baldoni. You know, he wasn't talking to her about his wife and she was like, oh my God, but I'm your wife. Who's Emily? I'm your wife. I'm Lily. We're married, remember? They were both conversing like adults. So I don't subscribe to that path of thinking in the social media discourse. And then obviously Justin Baldoni released this voice note, and this was very polarizing. The one that starts with, hey, Blake, it's 2 a.m. This was another piece of really polarizing evidence, but it was a 6-minute voice note where we basically hear Justin Baldoni trying to alleviate any concerns, worries that she has, To some people, that sounds creepy. To some people, it sounds kind. Because multiple people see the same thing completely differently. So we've been thrown some pieces of evidence that some people listen to them and they're like, this has proved absolutely nothing. And then the other half of people are like, oh my God, look, see, this wins the case. Everything's so dramatic. I'm like, listen, let's just fucking see what happens in court. But because he has continued to release these pieces of evidence that sort of fill in the gaps of Blake Lively's lawsuit, people are now saying he's doing too much. He's putting too much out there. He's desperate to win the public. And you know, sometimes we don't want those friends who, when we tell them a situation, they're like, yeah, oh my God, that's like something I went through. I'm going to be that annoying friend right now, because sometimes we relate to things by comparing them to our own life experiences. And obviously, I'm not a Hollywood A-lister. It's completely different. But in 2023, I went through a situation, an experience. Any hardcore listeners to the podcast will be familiar with it because it was quite openly discussed on the season 2 finale. And when that situation came out in the wash, there was a bit of he said, she said going on. And I was extremely open to making everything I had available, because I was someone in that situation who had nothing to hide. And the information that had been given about me had a lot of holes. And so I was extremely open to anyone being welcome to read my entire WhatsApp history with this other person in question, because if information about me was being put out there in a doctored way to serve a narrative that was completely untrue, I would have fucking given my phone to anyone who would have taken it, because I wanted to make the point that, sure, there might be some things in this conversation in the long run that don't look glorious for me. You know, they don't make me look fucking amazing, but you will see the actual journey of this conversation and how everyone in this situation got to where they got to. And it's absolutely not what you have been presented with. You know, I have everything in its entirety, and I'm fucking happy for anyone to read it. I mean, God, I would have publicized it all over my social media given half the chance, because at the time I did feel defensive. I wanted people to know the truth of the situation. That was a horrible situation, and the situation was bad enough without lies being created to try and make one person look worse in it than the other, or, you know, whatever people try and do to make themselves look better. They try and drag down someone else further, when actually, no, the situation was shit. Like, let's own it for what it was, but actually take accountability for your own behavior within it. So I understand the desire to be like, here is all the information. Here is literally everything. Please read everything and then make your own mind up before you read bits and pieces. And therefore you don't have the whole fucking story. Like, it does feel infuriating to feel like only bits of information are being put out there. At the end of the day, people are going to believe what they are going to believe. You know, you can't control what people are going to make of a situation, but what you can do is give people all the information and give them the chance to figure out what that is for themselves, rather than forcing it on them by providing only a small amount, or providing, you know, events in a false timeline. And what is actually really difficult in general with sexual harassment is it is known for being difficult to prove, because it is very often a he said, she said, he said, she said, they said situation. You know, there often isn't a wealth of evidence to draw from to be able to prove or disprove it. This is probably one of few cases where we are seeing so much evidence brought to the forefront, because often sexual harassment is treated as two people experiencing the same situation completely differently. One person thinking, sure, maybe something's flirty, but it's all a bit harmless, while the other person thinks they are being manipulated or coerced into something. And I obviously take sexual harassment extremely seriously, but one person could say the same thing to 5 different people, and 3 of them could think it's harmless and 2 of them could think it's sexual harassment. And that is where we get into a really tricky grey area, because who decides? if one person believes they are being harassed in one way or another, but there's no clear evidence, should perception alone dictate the consequences? How do we manage that? I'm actually asking these questions because I really have no idea. In life, sometimes people will tell me that they've been offended by things that have been said, or someone will tell me something they've said to someone else and that person in response has been offended. And I would not personally be offended by that if it was said to me, or vice versa. I might get offended by something that 20 other people might literally not give a shit about. And it's such a muddy area, again, when we get into nuance and we get into emotions. And obviously, I've never really had to deal with anything in this sphere. But a couple of years ago, I had a friendship breakup where a friend of mine who I've been, best friends with for a decade called me kind of what felt like a little bit out of the blue with like a 20-piece list of things that she thought were wrong with me as a person and wrong with me as a friend. It's given Blake Lively's list of demands to return to filming. This was her being like, change all these things about you or I don't want to be your friend anymore. And it kind of was astounding when she relayed some situations to me, some from years ago, like things that I'd forgotten about even happening. And she would relay situations to me from her perspective. And I had no idea she felt like that about the way things had played out in any which way. And, that was a huge thing to me of realizing, wow, we've really been seeing our friendship, our experiences completely differently. And the events have indeed happened. But, there was even one point where she had an audition for something and she had not heard back from her final audition. And I obviously have had, however many auditions in my time, hundreds of auditions that I haven't got. That's not even like I've had hundreds of auditions. The point is I've had hundreds of auditions that I haven't got the job. But sometimes you do wait a really long time. And I, trying to be helpful, which was my intention, said, well, I think probably the best thing to do is to call your agent because it's going to be, it could be a couple of things. Maybe they have you penciled in and they're just trying to fit the jigsaw together. Maybe you are going to be a yes, but they haven't released the offers or the contracts yet and you're still on hold. Worst case scenario, they might have offered it to someone else. And if that person doesn't accept the contract for whatever reason, you might then get an offer. And I think maybe some people take offense to that, but I'm like, listen, if I end up doing the job, I end up doing the job. It don't matter if 20 people ahead of me turned it down. It's still my job. It's still my paycheck. So, I kind of tried to say there's all these options of things it might be, but the best way for you to move forward is to call your agent and just see if you can get any answers, and that will hopefully put your mind at rest. That to me is how I remember it. Like, unless I'm completely losing my mind, that is how I remember that conversation going down. And when this situation was relayed to me, it was relayed as I was really upset because I hadn't heard back from my final, and you said to me, well, it's probably because someone else has got it. I was like, wait, what? Huh? Huh? That's what you took from that conversation. That's what you took from my response that I put thought and care into. That you really are choosing to see the worst possible version of that response. But if it's how she saw it, it's how she saw it. Like I can't invalidate how it made her feel. And another funny thing was, at one point it was suggested that I wasn't being supportive about something because I hadn't asked when to go and see a show that she was currently appearing in. And I was like, I'm pretty sure I asked. And I found the message. I found the receipt. Me giving Justin Baldoni over here. I found the receipt of this message. And I was like, hey, listen, obviously if you feel unsupported, that's important to me and we should talk about that. But if you're basing feeling unsupported on this whole idea that I didn't send a message asking when to come and see you, I have sent this message. In fact, I have it here and here it is. And the response I got back from that was, I don't think we should be doing tit for tat, sending messages XYZ. But to me, I was like, in a court of law, because this is always my way of thinking, in a court of law, this would be evidence. If you stood up in a court of law and you said, this person hasn't supported me because they have not sent me this one particular message, and then they were like, we're going to bring into evidence Exhibit A. Here is the message of her saying, when can I come and see this show? You know, with all due respect, I'd win the fucking case. So, you know, evidence has its place, basically. Keep your fucking receipts. But I guess I saw for the first time someone so close to me who I really loved and cared for with all of my heart. I realized that we had been seeing our entire relationship, our entire friendship, you know, all of our experiences together, all of our correspondence with each other, the way we were relating to each other was completely different, completely opposing views of what was going on. And, you know, I will always feel passionately about what I put into that friendship, but at the same time, she feels how she feels, you know, and if that's what she takes from her experiences and feelings towards me, then it is what it is. But sometimes I'm like, maybe we are looking at a difference of opinion. Maybe we are looking at people who didn't get each other, who don't get each other, who aren't friends. You know, we all work jobs and we're like, we probably wouldn't be friends with these people in real life. And I worry if this is a case of two people who didn't get on, who really didn't relate to each other in the long run. And this has just gotten really, really fucking out of hand. It's all gotten really fucking messy. There's now so much money involved. There's so many people involved, and maybe no one ever thought it would get this far. Even if we look at the Deadpool movies, Ryan Reynolds brought this character called Nice Pool into them. And we can all see that this is a piss take of Justin Baldoni, the man bun, the talking about feminism. And I don't know, you know, if I had been sexually harassed by someone, I mean, listen, I kind of deal with my trauma through humor too. So no, if I had been sexually harassed by someone and my husband was publicly, and not just publicly, like on a Marvel stage, you know, like on a Marvel level platform, just quite trivially taking the piss out of this person, I'd be like, I don't know, I think it's kind of insensitive. I don't know. You know, there's been a lot of sort of making light of it. And actually, if we are dealing with sexual harassment here, that's not light. I don't think sexual harassment is light. I think it's incredibly, incredibly dark, and it's incredibly serious because it's a really difficult thing to get to the bottom of. So if we are making light of it, if we are trivializing it, I think even just the case of sexual harassment altogether, that's really worrying because it's also sort of showing victims of sexual harassment that it's okay to make light of it. And it isn't. Like, it's a really serious thing to deal with if that is what is going on. And now everyone's past behavior is being dragged into things. You know, we're finding interviews of Blake Lively from fucking like 1953, or like Justin Baldoni's wedding speech where he said, you know, I haven't always been a good man. So much past behavior is being brought into things. We're seeing interviews from Ryan Reynolds from, you know what I mean, like the 1800s. It's getting out of control. And we are now judging this one situation on all of these past behaviors. And what I will say, of course, when you look at people's track records, it can play into the way they treat people, the way they relate to others, whether they appear to be an empathetic person, whether they appear to be a good collaborator, a good team player. Of course, these things play into things. But how much can we judge this situation on It Ends With Us from an interview from Blake Lively like 23 years ago? Because surely we want to believe people can grow and change, because if we don't, then what's the fucking point? What's the point of even having these conversations? I mean, there'd be no point me having this podcast. There'd be no point me trying to go into therapy. You know, if we don't believe people can grow or change, let's just all go on having bad sex and terrible relationships forever and just accept it as a part of life, because no one's willing to change or look at their behaviors or reflect and think about, how can I make my life and other people's lives around me better? So I completely understand that there are a lot of past interviews and opinions of everyone involved from years gone by. But also, if I was being judged now in 2025 on the person I was in 2001, I'm a completely different person. I wouldn't make half the decisions that I made then. So that to me is concerning, that we are consistently judging these people on what we can drag up on them from the past. And Blake Lively has now gone so far as to hire, I think, an ex-CIA agent to see what they can dig up on Justin Baldoni. And what I believe to have happened is the most recent update is that it's come through that some of his employees think he creates an environment of toxic positivity. So it's all getting really fucking out of control. People are losing their way because we're all just trying to grab at straws to make sense of things. That's what it is. We are all trying to find XYZ pieces of evidence or opinions or thoughts or previous experiences people have had with anyone involved and make it make sense. We do want the 2 + 2 to equal 4, but because we are dealing with, facets of the law, like harassment, like smear campaigns, like defamation, a lot of it is feeling. A lot of it is one person feeling uncomfortable when it hasn't been the other person's intention. So maybe we aren't going to be able to make sense of it. But I would say, I think my least favorite thing about this case is the sentiment that if you don't automatically believe Blake Lively, it's somehow a reflection of internal misogyny or a lack of feminism, because that's actually a huge misunderstanding of what feminism is about. I think people might be confusing the idea of believing women with simply believing a woman just because she's a woman. And that is not what feminism stands for. Believing women has been its own issue that comes up very regularly because for so long, women's voices were silenced, particularly in cases of abuse or assault. But again, the point isn't to believe someone just because they are a woman. It's to make sure they are heard, because historically, that hasn't always been the case. A lot of women wouldn't have been able to take this to trial. But it doesn't mean that every accusation should be automatically treated as fact. The core of feminism is making sure people's voices are heard and respected, and that accusations are taken seriously, but also that where they can be, they are backed up by evidence. It's about treating women with respect and ensuring that all claims, whether from men or women, are taken seriously, but also scrutinized to get to the truth. We have to challenge harmful stereotypes and biases that affect all genders. So if the narrative is pushing for blind belief in a woman's accusation just because she's a woman, that's actually going against the spirit of feminism. Feminism is aiming for fairness for everyone. Just because you question or withhold belief in a specific accusation doesn't mean you are against women or that you are promoting misogyny. And that seems to have become the go-to line towards anyone who is supporting Justin Baldoni, especially if they are a woman. Everyone's getting called internal misogynists. And I would love, in fact, I implore anyone out there to come and tell me to my face that I could be an internal misogynist. Please, I beg. Because, come on, will we be so for real? Never in a million fucking years. I try and fight misogyny all day, every day. Feminism is not about blind belief or ignoring the facts. If someone is falsely accusing someone else, they should be held to the same standard of honesty, the same standard of account. That's what equality is all about. And that's what we want, right? Equality. So I'm just going to sum that up. Not believing Blake Lively, not just blindly believing Blake Lively, does not make someone an internal misogynist. Anyway, the whole thing is a fucking shit show mess. As of now, the whole thing keeps intensifying. There has been a request, as I already said, for an enhanced protective order to classify certain evidence as attorney's eyes only, which could limit our access, the public access, due to the people and the materials. Obviously, Justin Baldoni's legal team is opposing this, saying the only reason this is being requested is to protect the reputations on Blake Lively's side. And they argue that this contradicts her previous disclosures and media engagements regarding the case. The whole reason the case is even in existence is because she put it out in the media. So, it doesn't look great. A Simple Favor 2 has just been released with Blake Lively and Anna Kendrick. And obviously the conspiracy theorists are doing their thing. They are all suggesting that Anna Kendrick is siding with Baldoni. And that's because during the press, I don't know if anyone has seen it, but the other day there was a video of the two of them on the red carpet. And when asking Blake Lively what it's like to work with Anna Kendrick, she says, "It's so great. I'm so happy." And then they ask Anna Kendrick what it's like to work with Blake Lively. She says, "Oh. So people are doing their thing. They're making their narratives. Who knows how that's going to pan out? I'm sure we're all going to find out. There's also all of this stuff about the morality clause. So basically, what I will say, I think, is if you read through the documents, the legal documents, you can see that Blake Lively wanted to take over this movie. And throughout their communications, you can kind of see the downfall of it. And what was one really sketchy thing to come out of the whole thing was Colleen Hoover obviously massively seemed to side with Blake at the beginning. And then it came out further into this process that obviously Justin Baldoni is signed up to direct. I think the other book is called It Starts With Us. So he would have been in line to direct It Starts With Us. And Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds apparently want the rights for this book, for this movie. And clearly Colleen Hoover's their bestie. And the only way that they could inherit those rights from Justin Baldoni is if he broke a morality clause. And I don't think anyone has to be a genius to fucking figure out that sexual harassment is immoral. I'm sure that goes against the morality clause. Again, it doesn't look great. It looks kind of sketchy. I don't know the ins and outs of that kind of thing in a contract, but it doesn't look fantastic. And I think it's safe to say multiple people's careers are going to get ruined here. And one thing that I think is important to note, and I mean, most of the time, I cannot stand celebrity culture because of this, but it has a real and quite profound impact on people, whether it's the Kardashians promoting diet teas that basically make people shit themselves into an eating disorder, or whether it's a movement like the Me Too movement. So whether it's good or bad, a lot of people pay attention to what celebrities do. And cases like this have an impact on, as I said, how people might see similar situations in the future, because they serve as a public bar that people measure their own situations against. So if Blake Lively is lying about her allegations against Justin Baldoni, it could have significant consequences, both for survivors of sexual harassment and the broader conversations about believing victims. And here is why. One of the biggest fears when false allegations happen is they can be weaponized to discredit real victims. Survivors already face immense scrutiny when they come forward, as we are seeing play out in this case. Whoever is the victim, everyone is getting scrutinized, but many are dismissed, accused of seeking attention, or told they're exaggerating. So if a high-profile case like this is exposed as a lie, it could reinforce skepticism towards all victims and make it even harder for people to speak up in the future. It could fuel the men are the real victims narrative. And we have seen this before. One false allegation can be ammunition for those who claim the Me Too movement has gone too far. Certain groups will use this case as proof in inverted commas, that men are being unfairly targeted and that believe women is a flawed concept. Whilst false accusations are statistically rare, they do happen. And when they do, they create disproportionate damage to public perception of actual survivors. Damage to the feminist movement. Feminism at its core is about equality and fairness. So if a prominent woman is caught lying about sexual harassment, it could give anti-feminist groups a reason to dismiss all feminist causes. They will argue that the movement isn't about justice, but it's about punishing men. And that could slow progress on real issues like actual workplace harassment, gender-based violence, and legal protections for victims. It could have consequences for Hollywood and the industry. If Blake Lively is found to have fabricated her story, It could lead to even stricter evidence requirements for victims in the entertainment industry. Studios might become more reluctant to support actors who come forward, fearing that false accusations like this could lead to massive lawsuits like this. And this could create an environment where real victims are silenced out of fear they won't be believed, or worse, they'll be sued for defamation. And if Justin Baldoni is innocent, the stain of allegations never really disappears. You know, even after being cleared, public perception is really tricky. However, if Blake Lively is telling the truth, the case takes on a whole different meaning. It will be time for another Me Too reckoning for Hollywood. You know, the film industry has spent years claiming that it is cleaning its act up post Me Too. But if her allegations are true, it will prove that predatory behavior is still happening behind the scenes, just with better PR to cover it up. If a high-profile actress like Blake Lively can be harassed and then allegedly have her reputation destroyed when she speaks out, what does that say about power dynamics that are still at play? The fear of retaliation becomes reality. One of the biggest reasons victims don't come forward is fear of retaliation, and that is exactly what Blake Lively is accusing Justin Baldoni of doing. So if her claims hold up in court, it sends the message that speaking out against powerful men can cost you your reputation, your career, and even your personal life. You know, it will reinforce that the entertainment industry still has a deeply ingrained problem of protecting abusers rather than victims. If Justin Baldoni actually harassed Blake Lively and then turned around and sued her for defamation, it highlights a very dangerous legal strategy being used more and more often. You know, it's weaponizing defamation suits to silence victims. And we saw this play out in the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial. Regardless of personal opinions, Amber Heard's loss made survivors afraid to speak out because they feared they would be dragged into year-long legal battles. Also, Justin Baldoni has built a public persona as a feminist, a champion for women, and someone dedicated to social justice. So if Blake Lively's allegations are true, that will raise serious questions about men who brand themselves as allies whilst allegedly engaging in the very behavior they claim to stand against. It forces us to ask, how many other good guys are hiding behind progressive activism while behaving differently behind closed doors? And if her claims about these things happening off camera hold up, it highlights a common issue in harassment cases, that much of it happens in private, unrecorded situations. And this is why so many survivors struggle to prove their cases. And this is what I was talking about. There are some things about this case that we may never, ever know. And Hollywood has a long history of making inconvenient evidence disappear. But if Blake Lively does have proof that Justin Baldoni's team have edited or manipulated what's being released, it could be a massive revelation about how these cover-ups happen. Unfortunately, at the minute, it kind of looks to be vice versa because of all the bits that her team left out that Justin Baldoni's popped in. But, you know, we're not going to know what's gone down until we see how this plays out in court. But as you can see, it could go one of two extremely different ways. And if these are false accusations, that is such a dangerous, dangerous game to play for women. The tough thing is I'm like, I don't know what I hope for most, because I hope that this didn't happen. But I also hope that these aren't false accusations because of how fucking dangerous that is for people who are actually dealing with this as a very real and existing issue. So I think my main point of this podcast is the way in which this case highlights nuance and why it is so important. And yes, it's important when we're dealing with allegations of misconduct, but also just in life. Why critical thinking is so important. There's a huge difference between believing that victims deserve to be heard and believing people without question. If Blake Lively is lying, it doesn't mean that all victims lie. That's not what that is then going to mean. All this means is we need to handle each case with care, with fairness, and a commitment to the truth. And I would say all of those things could be applied to our own lives and our own relationships. And none of this is going anywhere soon. You know, if you want to fully invest in the information, you can read the lawsuits online. You can read the lawsuit and the timeline of events on Justin Baldoni's website, which is thelawsuit.info. But essentially, all of the legal documents associated with this case can be found online. They are public information. So if you feel like you want to take the time and read the entirety of them, I mean, I would highly recommend it, because I will be continuing to try and keep up to date with what is going on. But you know, this podcast isn't going to become the Justin Baldoni Blake Lively podcast. I just wanted to offer some thoughts, and who fucking knows where this is going to go with this trial unfolding like its own Hollywood script. One thing is for sure, it certainly does not end with us. It's only just fucking beginning, and the only place it does end is in the courtroom. Okay, friends, lovers, listeners, that is my social commentary for now, and we will be resuming normal service as of the next episode, and it will actually be this season's Ask Peach. I won't be getting distracted by the fact I think I'm a lawyer now. I mean, I've given history and science teacher enough times on this podcast. Why not a lawyer for a while? But yes, please do start sending over any questions you may have about anything sex and relationships related, and I will see you very soon. You know you love me. XOXO, Lawsuit Girl. Thanks for coming. Thank you for tuning in to Sex on the Peach today, and I hope that you enjoyed this week's episode. You can find and follow me on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at Sex on the Peach Cast, and you can also get in touch with me at sexonthepeachcast@gmail.com. Please do continue to like, share, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to your podcasts, and I'll see you next week. Love.